Welcome to the Audiation in the Wild podcast with your hosts, Beau Taillefer and Eric Rasmussen. Season 2, Episode 32. Audiation is not conceptual.
Well, welcome to today's episode. We're going to talk about a topic that I love thinking about, and it can get pretty deep. It's a fun topic. Audiation is not conceptual. So what do we mean by that?
I want to hear what your definition of concept is, because sometimes we've had a tug and pull and push with regard to how Engelman talked about concept, and then how a tonal pattern is a conceptual piece.
Yeah.
I just want you to clarify that.
Okay.
Because I still have trouble, because you've got so much stronger background in the word and how it's used. Because I consider concepts like terms.
Yeah.
And it's different.
Yeah. Okay. So I think in the everyday way of thinking about concepts they're something like language or thoughts. That's, I think, what most people consider concepts to be. Now, the way that Engelman talks about concepts is totally different. And so we should talk about that, because we apparently talk about Engelman almost as much as Gordon on this podcast now. But in Engelman's view, a concept is something that is noticed in your direct sensory experience, and it is what you apply the label to. So, for example, if I want to teach you what the color red is, I can't give you a definition. Red is this many hertz, yada, yada, yada. That's a thought-based definition. That's a thought-based label. What Engelman is talking about, and this is what inductive learning is, you have to show someone a bunch of examples of different objects that are red, and then you say, like, that's red, that's red, that's red, and then you show them the same object that's different colors. So like a red cup, the same cup that's blue, the same cup that's green, and you say that's red, that's not red, that's not red. And by doing that, the person becomes aware of what red is in their direct experience. So like in the very, like they're mindfully aware of red in their immediate experience. They're not conceptually thinking like, well, green has this many hertz and red has this many hertz. And that's all thrown out the window. It's just the concept in Engelman's view, a sensory concept, is noticed from direct mindfulness, direct experiencing. And what's amazing about this type of learning is how much it actually changes your experience to know what it is. And so the label, in a sense, is a throwaway. It doesn't even matter what the label is. Like, you could call red splee as a word, splee, and it doesn't change the direct experience of red once someone is aware of what red is and what red is not. And so sometimes you've heard me say things on the podcast, like a tonal pattern is a piece of, it's an audiated concept, or a rhythm pattern is an audiated concept, but that's in Engelman's language.
Yes.
But what I mean, so there's all that. So, you might have to re-listen to that a couple times, but like, now we'll go on to what I want to talk about today. Is audiation itself has nothing to do with thought or definition or labels or any of that. We can use labels, just how we use language and labels to do other things with our senses. Language is invaluable. I'm not saying that it's not, but audiation exists in a different realm from the normal way we think of concepts in terms of definitions and all that kind of stuff. And why is this important to understand? What is the usefulness? Because I think if you don't understand this, you don't actually know what audiation is. You haven't clarified in your own experience, which is that's the only place you can clarify what audiation is. No definition of audiation is audiation, just like no definition of green is the immediate experience of greenness. I had this guitar student, who's actually a really good friend of mine now. We did guitar lessons, and he was setting a good example for his daughters. So while his daughters were taking music lessons, he was in the room next to them taking guitar lessons. And I would just hammer this home every week. I would have some kind of 5-10 minute rant about what audiation is. And I don't do this with all my students by any means, but he was really interested in what I was saying, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And he would watch me improvise, and I would just come up with things off the top of my head. And he would be like, how do you know what notes, or how do you know the names of the notes? How do you know all this stuff? I'm like, that's not where my attention is. Like, you end up sounding like a Zen master when you try to explain how improv works. It's like, I'm literally just hearing the sounds like in my mind, and my hands are playing those sounds. Like, it's that simple. There's no names of notes. There's no anything going on. It can be going on, but that's not the root of what this is about. And I remember this had a big impact on him, because what's really remarkable, you understand what audiation is in terms of it being non-conceptual. There's a lot in life you can understand, because this principle applies across your life in other things. You know, the experience of eating food that you like is not conceptual. You can't describe the taste. I mean, no amount of rating menus will bring the taste.
What does salt taste like? You can't do it unless you've got salt in your mouth.
Yeah, and in philosophy, I mean, especially in the whole like consciousness philosophy discussion, this is called the ineffability problem, because there's no way you can remember things as detailed as you can experience them. It's just not possible. Like, even when you can audiate like a Mozart symphony in your mind, it is a faint version of hearing the actual symphony in your direct experience. They are related, but just like a really good example of this in another sense domain that's not music, but it's really useful to do. Look at your hand for a few seconds and just notice the vividness of the experience, the immediacy of the experience, the colors, the shapes, and then look away, look out the window, or look at the wall, or if you're driving, for the love of God, look at the road, and try to remember what your hand looked like. And what you are remembering is a faint...
it's a pattern of some of what you saw.
I mean, I would push even farther and say that it's not even related to what you saw. The memory feels like it's pointing to the original sensory experience, but the memory is something else. The memory is just a new experience in your mind. It seems related because it seems like the memory is talking about the actual hand that you were looking at, and it kind of is pointing at it. Thought has the ability to do that, but it's nowhere near as vivid and as rich as the actual experience of seeing. It can't be.
Is it a hologram-ish?
And this is what thought is. Thought is like, one aspect of thought or memory is this like reflective ability, or this ability to kind of mimic the senses, right? I mean, I would even say this for like audiated recall. If you try to recall Charlie Parker tune in your head, it's kind of there. It's like you're audiating the sounds. You can hear where the resting tone is. You can hear it all, but it damn sure is not the same as someone actually playing the saxophone in front of you. It's much more vivid. You lose something. And so you have always said this really interesting thing to me, Eric, is that like, just because we can notate and even notationally audiate tonal patterns and rhythm patterns and melodies, there's a whole world of music that is not represented on notation. No matter how well you put staccatos and dynamics on the page, like, it's just the timbre is not in the notation. All this stuff is not in the notation.
Swing certainly isn't.
Swing certainly isn't. So I mean, this is what was on my mind last week. Is I enjoy this topic philosophically, but it's very weird to investigate, because the concepts that I'm using to point to this, like the descriptions and the labels, they can help you find it in your experience, but they are almost no use to you when you're trying to figure this out. Because this is a realm where concepts don't help you. The only thing that can help is someone showing you examples of music and say, that's audiation. Whatever, like, hear Jingle Bells in your head right now. That's it. Picture what Jingle Bells looks like on notation. That's not it.
It's like the hardest thing to do as a human being is to think about yourself, because you're the ones thinking the thoughts that you're applying to yourself. And it's like,
Well, there's something in there.
how do you stand outside yourself to look at yourself, to have an objective view of yourself? You can't. And so audiation might be the same way, that you're you can't audiate your audiate, or I don't know. I went somewhere.
He said something. Yeah, he said some. I mean, it's just an interesting thing, and this is why I think our AI algorithms for writing music. I mean, they're either really good or they suck because they're not actually audiating. I don't think that these AI things, they're not having an internal subjective experience of music. They're using rules and codes and probability. Well, it sounds like they're doing something like thinking, but they're not doing audiating.
No, there's no thinking involved. They're putting the information. They're searching. What I said about your hand, they're searching for patterns. That's all they do.
Mm-hmm.
That's all they can do. That's all any experience is looking for patterns and putting them together in a way that makes sense. Because if you don't have patterns, then everything's just chaos all the time.
Sure. But I mean, there's still a huge difference between like coming up with conceptual patterns or finding patterns in your audiation, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like if I go bum 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 or bum bum bum, in my mind those were related, but not theoretically. Like sure, theoretically too, in terms of theoretical understanding, one was similar to the other, but it's at a more gut level. Like there was something radically similar about those, and the only way you could make that comparison is in this like realm of audiation. And this is why, honestly, Eric, I'm going to be quite blunt here. This is why people suck at improv, is because they think it's a theoretical thing. They think it's like, well, this scale will work over this chord. I mean, that's all garbage. Yeah. It's useful to know in a certain way, but man, like the priorities can get backwards. Like they can get really.
But that's how I was taught to learn to improvise. It was really the death of me. I couldn't understand. I really went up to my buddy and I said, "How do you know what note's coming next?" I just like, how do you know what you're doing?
Mm-hmm.
And I eventually learned to take that leap off a cliff, because improvisation really has to be made up. It can't be a copycat. It can't be a imitative. But that's how you get there. But ultimately, it's not. Could be a creative act without being improvisation, because you don't know what changes you're on. Because that's the difference between creativity and improvisation. You got restrictors.
But this is interesting in terms of this continuum of creativity to improv. I was trying to describe this to a friend who's a really good audiator, but he doesn't know anything about MLT, which is, I mean, nothing wrong with that. Like he's an amazing musician.
Audiation in the wild, baby.
He's an amazing musician. Yeah. And when we think of creativity having less kind of constraints and improv having a lot of constraints, it's very tempting to think that those constraints are theoretical constraints. And that's where I think this problem is born. When people think like, okay, Autumn Leaves has these changes and then this is all theoretical information. But when you understand like the constraints of Autumn Leaves chord progression or function progression through the actual, you can audiate the changes. Right? It's not a theoretical thing for you anymore. You can feel when the one chord is coming. You can feel, and what do I mean by feel? I mean you're anticipating it in this realm of audiating. You're not anticipating it theoretically. And this is where this gets really confusing, because the people that are good at this, they can actually almost always do the theoretical thing too. It's very common that they can. Mm-hmm. And so when you start taking lessons from like the hottest jazz player in your town, and they're like, you got to learn theory, you got to learn scales. I mean, that's like telling someone it's not necessarily wrong. It's just, it might not be right for where you are on the sequence yet. Right. I mean, that's like, It's like someone telling you to bake a cake. It's like, you got to have the icing. You got to have the icing, but you don't even have the fucking cake built yet. Like there's nowhere to put the icing on. And so like when you're getting lessons from master audiators, a lot of them, I think, rightly stand up for theoretical understanding. I will stand up for it, but it can be done in the wrong order. You know, it can just be done in the wrong, there's an order to the way things should go.
There are people that can audiate and understand the theory at the same time, simultaneously, because they're great at both things. And then there's people that can audiate like crazy and don't understand a lick about theory, Errol Garner,
Sure.
right? And then there's people that probably play changes by thinking about the scales that go over those changes or something. And then that becomes an episode or a, what is that? It is just, of floundering.
And I brought this up on the podcast before, but I think this happens to a lot of MLT teachers. We teach tonal patterns, rhythm patterns through audiation. Even, I mean, maybe some people even use Eric's great harmonic learning sequence. But then we make this pivotal mistake. Everything up to that point has been done through audiation. And then we start teaching improv, and the stringing together of these tonal and rhythm patterns starts to become theoretical. We start saying like, okay, now it's a 1 chord, bum, bum, bum. Now it's a 4 chord, right? And so I'm not saying there's anything wrong with doing that. The overarching claim I'm making is just know what you're doing when you're doing it. If there's nothing wrong with exploring something theoretically and having no idea to audiate. I mean, that's how I'm learning to audiate some of these weird tonalities, that I didn't grow up auditing, these harmonic minor and melodic minor tonalities. But I'm very aware, like, this is begun as a theoretical thing. I'm not pretending I'm audiating it when I'm not. And I think
Yeah, I have a thing about once you break the sequence in some mode or fashion that you can never close that door again.
sure.
If you've only read, it's hard to, if you've only read music, it's hard to not read. It's really hard to go back the other way.
Mm-hmm.
So once you've gone too far into theoretical understanding, or I don't even mean that, into music theory, by learning the names of notes and lines of spaces, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, we kick that horse so many times in music learning theory, that you can also bring musicianship to the reading. But if you, what I mean to say is that if you go the correct direction, up through the learning sequence, if you stay true to that, then it would. Boy, you got me off of some deep end here in my thinking, because I'm trying to create a sentence that I don't know I've had before. So as you're progressing up through the stages of audiation inside of each learning sequence, and as long as you don't break the sequence, as long as you don't jump ahead, but the point is, one of the things is that you can skip reading and writing. If you take them out of the other ones are firm. You got to do or before that, but you don't got to read and write before you compose. You don't got to read and write before you improvise.
I actually don't think you need to read or write before you do theoretical understanding either. I think there's a lot of theoretical concepts that can be taught without notation. You need the verbal associate.
Everything can be taught without notation. Again, point and example is Errol Garner, who every great pianist that heard Errol Garner of his time said he was the best pianist, and he didn't know nothing theoretically.
He probably, I mean, the only thing I would say about Errol is like I have no doubt that he had like in terms of a visual keyboard audiation, like he probably had he could audiate, I would bet you, like his symbolic association, even though it was probably not notation. I'm assuming he could do it on the keyboard because he just, unless he was just playing with his eyes closed permanently. Yeah. So there's something there, but you are onto something.
Well, the guy had his left hand and his right hand were two different places in the music at the same time. He was accompanying himself. It never landed together. He was always pushing and pulling with the right hand. The left hand was laying it down. And that's just, so nobody really swang like that. Swung. So, swung.
Again, the label doesn't really matter. Can you swing?
It's the experience of swinging.
So there's a deep possibility here to investigate, what you even think music is, and I would argue potentially like your life at large here. If you can take this investigation to other parts of your life, it can be quite profound. I mean, this is really what mindfulness is about. Mindfulness isn't necessarily about learning to focus on your experience better from this arbitrary kind of model of training your attention. It's understanding that your experience is like when you pay attention to the white on a piano key, there's a quality of that visual experience that's ineffable. You cannot replicate it by thinking about it at all. And even the same with thought. I mean, thought kind of gets put against sensory experience here. So like when I talk about audiation, like audiation it's not just sound, obviously. It's something beyond that. But like theoretical understanding, for example, that's a different realm of experience. There's nothing wrong with it. I would just claim, like, I don't want anyone to feel like if they use theory to describe something that they've committed a sin. I'm just saying there's a problem with not knowing what you're doing when you're doing it.
Right.
That's really where you
theory
get into trouble.
is really great for us to talk to each other because it's shorthand for getting to the crux of the matter quickly.
For sure. Yeah, well, it definitely feels like that. I don't know if it always I don't know if it always is. But it can also be an interesting exercise. Like if you're listening to this podcast and you know what we're talking about, I'm assuming you have recognized what audiation is in your experience, or else this would just be pure gibberish to you. But even that, I mean, when you're listening to music and you start thinking like this is a tonal pattern, this is a rhythm pattern, there is a way to listen to music where you just throw all that in the garbage, you know, and you stop thinking about what things are called and why someone's doing something, and this is 8 bars, and this. I mean, that's all baggage from the mind, and there's nothing wrong with it.
Forget all that shit.
But
yeah, forget all that shit and wail, right? Charlie Parker quote.
And this is what Eric blew my mind. Like, I think before I broke through, like before when I was younger and I was trying to learn how to play jazz. I'm not saying I'm like I'm a finished, baked bread here by any means. But when I felt like I couldn't fly over changes to a reasonable degree, and I was trying to, and it felt like I was like trying to break through this like brick wall of bebop that I just like couldn't get through. I thought it was all harmony. I was like wrapped up in like theoretical harmony and harmony and what's this, and it was good stuff to learn. But when I really started hanging out with people that could play, I was like blown away. Like they're all thinking rhythm. They're not like that's all they're thinking about. And I just realized how profoundly misdirected my attention was. Not entirely, but to a large degree. I was so hopped up in the harmony. I forgot about the other aspects of music. Like I was seeing all music through a harmonic lens. Like bebop was good because it was complicated harmony. Taylor Swift's bad because it's easy harmony. It was like that was how I viewed music. And I think it can be instructive to have a focus like that. But I was really boiling all music down into like, what it could offer me harmonically. And those were something like a dark age in my mind.
You were working on on the thing that was hardest for you at the time, maybe.
And the thing, I was interested in it too.
It's more complicated anyway. Yeah. So I have Charlie Parker in my mind this whole episode.
Is that Yardbird? Is that Yardbird Suite? What is that?
I don't remember.
Yeah, Parker, for me...
Scrapple from the Apple, I don't know. There's so many of them. They're all bunched in my mind the same.
No, that's not Scrapple.
I'm not great with titles.
Parker is a really good example of what I'm talking about, where like if you try to study all this jazz harmony, it's all in there. The tritone subs, the 2-5-1s, the secondary dominants, but that's not for me what makes Parker who he is. I mean, it's part of it, but the rhythmic ideas are so they're so coherent. They're almost like sculptures that are like perfect. Like every motif is just like it's been carved in stone and it just propels forward. And the harmony is part of that. But to me, like if you just scat the rhythms of Parker, there's something complete enough in that without even talking about harmony. And you can almost see where his, part of his focus was when he was composing or improvising.
Yeah. All right, now everybody needs to just go home and audiate the With Charlie Parker in the background.
I think that's what, certain different cultures of music have, I think, picked up on this. Like, um, like historical Japanese, like cultural music seems very aware of timbre in a way that Western mind is not very concerned with timbre, and it's because they're audiating it better than I think a lot of people in Western society audiate timbre, and it's a more acknowledged part of the music to play with the timbre of the notes, and it's not so much about playing flashy changes or notes. It's more about getting inside the timbre, and that's kind of what I've realized about different artists. Different artists have different facets of audiation they're playing with, and you might revel in bebop because of the harmony and the rhythmic structure, but then you listen to like John Cage, and if you try to apply that lens through like a lot of John Cage's stuff, you're going to be profoundly dissatisfied in what you hear, because that's not like the point of his music. So you can, music doesn't have to be this like only tonal and rhythm lens. And
Oh no.
we heard this like we were talking about the criticisms of Gordon from Chat GPT, or AI, language based AI, and this was one of the criticisms of MLT, is that and I think there is some truth in this, that it can make your mind only look at things through these two dimensions, tonal and rhythm, and
they don't even allow harmonic.
yeah.
To the degree that it belongs.
But it's definitely interesting to think about.
Yeah, it's like, what is the string theory of music education? Like you get into like a place of absurdity.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you end up sounding like you're talking about Zen, pretty much, or you sound like
Yeah, well, that's what you opened up. And I was trying to cinch it together with a thought I had about. I have to think about it.
Yeah, you were saying something about, how do you stand outside yourself or outside your mind
Experience to get a sense. So how do you stand outside? How do you audiate outside the how do you audiate outside the musician that's audiating? How can you see how you're working your audiation?
I'm not sure how comfortable people will be with this. I'm not sure how comfortable you'll be with this, but this is an interesting thing to investigate. When you're audiating, is there actually someone watching the audiation, or is there just the experience of audiating?
The tree in the forest.
Yeah, like is there, and this can be, depending on your philosophical beliefs, this can be more or less uncomfortable to investigate, but is there actually someone in your experience right now listening to these sounds, or are there just sounds coming out of your headphones being spontaneously heard? It's quite a different orientation to take. I'm not making any metaphysical claims about the universe at large. I'm just saying, if you actually notice your experience right now, I mean, does it feel like you're the one listening to sounds, or does it just feel like sounds spontaneously arrive and are known? If you can get into that, something might open up. Definitely worth spending some time.
This is out there. We need a different kind of warning on this episode.
Warning: may induce
cognitive overload or underload.
Yeah, or I think disorientation is the word I would use for that. It's because not only can you abandon your concepts around what audiation is and just experience audiation, I mean, you can abandon concepts around what you think all this stuff is. And not to say that concepts are bad or not useful. I mean, I have to meet Eric at 8:30 in the morning. If I'm not here, I'm late. But all of that is just a bunch of thinking in a certain sense.
Is there such thing as time? Who invented time?
Probably God.
All right, we better get off here.
All right, team. Till next time.
If there is one.